I'm Milton Schoen, and welcome to America Salutes. Today we have Judge Charles Porter, who is the Chief Judge for the Hennepin County Veterans Court, as our guest. Judge Porter has an illustrious background. He's got his BA from Lawrence, his MA from the University of St. Thomas, and he's University of Minnesota Law School grad. He practiced in private practice before being appointed to the bench. He's been chief juvenile judge, he's been chief family judge, and he's been presiding judge, criminal judge for the Hennepin District Court, and he's also been a statewide leader of president of the District Judges Association. So welcome, Judge Porter. And
good to be here, Milton.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? I filled in a few of the dots.
Well, as is applicable to this issue, I have a military career as well. I was in ROTC in college and went on to active duty during the Vietnam War with the Air Force. I spent 4 years with the Air Force as a judge advocate. Got off active duty and went into the Air Force Reserve. And then due to some logistical issues, I transferred into the Navy. And I did about 30 years in the Navy Reserve before I retired a few years ago. I was the senior reserve captain in the JAG Corps at that time. Was on the bench, retired last summer from the Hennepin County District Court after about 31 years on the bench. And at that time, again, I was the senior trial judge in the state and had recently served as the District Judges Association president. So I bring to this Veterans Court job both a judicial career and a military career, not as illustrious as many, but at least, you know, when someone talks about a bad conduct discharge, at least I know what they're talking about.
Right. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about why we've got a Veterans Court and a little bit of the background here.
Well, I think you could make 20 reasons, but I think there are two that are the most important. And the first is that the folks that put this together, and many people in the state, believe that being in the military, and especially being in the military and at war, creates a special type of trauma, which in many cases results either directly or indirectly in criminal behavior, chemical abuse and dependency, or personality or behavioral change. And that the pure use of correctional consequences, that is jail or prison, does not serve the interest of reducing recidivism or saving cost, and it certainly doesn't result in the saving of lives or the life of those folks. So we have a statute in Minnesota that was pushed a few years ago by a couple of private lawyers, John Baker and Brock Hunter, and by our former First Lady, Mary Pawlenty, which requires judges to consider at sentencing in criminal matters whether or not a defendant has a veteran status. Now, in many courts throughout the state, because of their volume is quite a bit smaller than Hennepin, they do that on a case-by-case basis on their regular calendars. In our county, which you know, we're the 500-pound canary pretty much on every one of these deals, we have enough veterans coming through the criminal justice system that we can afford to have a separate subdivision of the court that deals only with veterans, and that subdivision meets once a week. We have now about 120 veterans in there. My estimate is that that's about a quarter of the veterans we actually have. We're kind of building up to a real number, and you know, we were talking before we went on the air about the number of reservists that are going to be returning here in the next few months after we're doing this program.
Right. And some people would say that they have a misguided view of what the Veterans Court is. They think it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. They think that there are no consequences. But tell us a little bit about the fact that you're trying to get at the underlying factors that bring people before the court.
Well, wave of change in the way the courts deal with specialized problems has gone across the country, really, starting maybe in the early 90s with the advent of the drug courts. They are known collectively as problem-solving courts, and our problem that we deal with in the Veterans Court is that we believe that permanent change and better health, as well as reduced recidivism, are better achieved through psychological and educational intervention than through putting someone into jail. Many of our cases are relatively low-level offenses, and a veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, isn't going to get better by spending 30 days in the workhouse, for example. But by coming to our court, where we see most of our people monthly for a judicial review, they come in and tell me how their life has been going. Our interdisciplinary team meets each day before we have the calendar and discusses each case. So we're ready to do what we want to do each month or each 2 weeks or each week or whatever the time may be. That has a much more effective way, not only for society in dealing with the reduction in recidivism and the costs of the criminal justice system, but more importantly, to me at least, to deal with improvement and betterment of these folks' lives after they've been in combat.
Right, and I've personally seen, as we've had the deployments come back, significant numbers of individuals getting in trouble with the law, and we're very fortunate that we have the court to address these issues.
Well, and one of the things there that I think we're starting to learn, which is sort of a tragedy, is that there's sort of a life of of these folks. And they come back from deployment either as active duty military members or as guardsmen or reservists, and things go pretty well for them for the 30 days or so that they're in sort of reintegration training still on active duty. And then maybe for a period of 4 or 5 months as they're back in society, reconnecting with friends, reestablishing their relationships with their families. But at around that 4 or 5 month period, we see a significant number of them where their expectations for return have been dashed, and all of a sudden they get 2 or 3 DWIs in a matter of a couple of weeks, or they get their house becomes the place where domestic issues arise and the police are there on a regular basis, or they they return to having combat-related flashbacks. I mean, you've heard as many stories as I have about folks that had returned 6 months ago and are now sleeping with a loaded pistol under their pillow, or are up in the middle of the night doing low crawling around their living room because they think things are, there's people in the yard that are going to be after them. And those are the guys that we think, and ladies too, but those are the guys that we think we can cut that one off.
And that was a pretty good segue to the fact that you serve both men and women. And can you tell us anything about the data of the people that you're seeing? One of the substantial numbers of people, and I think it's 90 or 95% of them, were using some form of chemical at the time of their arrest.
Yes. Let me talk about the women first.
Sure.
To some extent, some of what I'm getting ready to say is purely my opinion, but we know as a fact that approximately a third of the women who have been deployed in these 2 wars that we're currently concerned about have been the victims of what's now become known as military sexual trauma. They've either been abused or attacked or otherwise mistreated in a sexual way during their deployment or during their training. And the folks that are watching who've been in the military, especially in the Army and the combat arms, the Marine Corps and the Army, know that one of the principles of being a foot soldier is that your primary responsibility is not for your own safety and for your own well-being, but to take care of the person next to you. And if you're a female combat soldier, and I mean the combat exclusion still applies to some extent, but if you're a truck driver or a military policeman or something, and the person who's next to you has been the perpetrator of sexual trauma on you or on one of your platoon mates, that's a special kind of trauma that we've never had a significant enough number to have to deal with. So the women have the same kind of issues: separation, chemical use, reactions to the combat environment. You know, we have the combat exclusion, and they made some changes in it here just recently, but that combat exclusion doesn't apply to people who are military police, for example. You've got a truck convoy. The guard is a military policeman and a woman. The driver is from the transportation motor pool and a woman. And the people in the back are the foot soldiers. Who's not in combat in that truck? And yet the combat exclusion does not apply to the truck driver and the military policeman.
Yeah, and we see, you know, there's a higher rate of homelessness amongst veterans, but it's twice as high among female veterans. And we see that the way this plays out, and the fact that we've had traditionally, traditionally the military and the VA have been male-dominated institutions, and they're having to transform themselves to deal with these issues. In this conflict, we're seeing the use of Guard and Reserves, and in past conflicts, the frontline troops, even Desert Storm, the frontline troops were active duty, and the backups were Guard and Reserve. So, tell us a little bit about that impact. Well,
that has created an interesting difficulty that we face in the Veterans Court. I can draw on. I mean, I did not serve in Vietnam, but I was, in ROTC and then on active duty during the Vietnam War, and that was a war that was fought primarily by recent high school graduates, in some districts, recent college graduates. Many of them were not married. Most of them had no children. Many of them had not had a job outside of education. When you fight a war with Guard and Reserves, like we're doing in Afghanistan and have been doing in Iraq, you're taking people who already have an established career, many of them. They have a job and they have the ability to go back to it if it exists. They have families, they have spouses or partners. And this reintegration process that we were talking about before is significantly complicated by the age and the history of the folks that are fighting this war. And when a guardsman or a reservist goes off to combat, or just to an overseas or even a stateside assignment, their partner, be it a spouse or just an affinity relationship, they have to take over the function. All of a sudden, someone who's never written a check has to do the bill paying. Someone who's used to having someone else do the driving has to do all the driving. It's all of those kinds of functions that were two-person functions before the deployment are now one-person functions. And what happens when the guardsman or the reservist returns is they want to step right back into this old relationship that exists. They want to come home from work and sit down at the table and be served by someone whose principal job is serving in that way. And the partner who stayed at home is a different person. I'm not saying that in a negative way. It's a positive way. They've kept the family together while the service person was serving the country, and the reestablishment of the old relationship just doesn't happen as easily or as often as it would be nice if it did. And that's this 4, 5, 6 month delay business. Well, they're kind of getting used to each other again, and in many cases, the relationship has changed in such a way that it can't be repaired.
Very good. And with that, we'll go to break, and we'll be right back.
I knew at first that I got hurt pretty bad because I couldn't move my legs.
Captain Eric Lawrence was training Afghan soldiers when his truck was hit by an IED.
I sat home alone for months. I didn't want that anymore. I wanted to go back to work. I don't want to be a drain on society. I want to be a positive thing in society. PBA helped me write my resume, got me a job interview. I got the job.
Paralyzed Veterans of America, changing lives, building futures.
Well, welcome back to America Salutes. Judge Porter, why don't you tell us a little bit about Judge Hopper's activities when we initiated the Veterans Court in Hennepin County?
Well, Judge Rich Hopper, a retired judge from the 1st District, was the essentially founder of our Veterans Court in the summer of 2010. And he kept it going there till the end of that year, and then I took over for him in December of 2010. It was his vision that we start this court, and his vision was interestingly driven by the principle of let's do it and we'll figure out how to afford it later. Many innovations in the court, you find the funding first and then you create the use for the funding. His belief was that he could recruit people to participate in this program, and then we'd figure out how to fund it later. And the real magic of this court is that we have this multidisciplinary team that meets on everybody's case and then handles the work of these guys. And of course, your office is part of that team with Hennepin Veteran Services. We have representatives from the Veterans Administration who come every week, usually 3 of them. We have dedicated public defenders who are there every week. We have dedicated prosecutors from both the county attorney's office and the city attorney's office. We have 3 full-time probation officers and then 3 probation officers that have specialized caseloads, 1 for domestic abuse cases, 1 for female offenders, and 1 for sex offenders if we end up having any. We have, of course, me. We have a statistician from the district court who is doing measures of our performance on an ongoing basis. I guess she and I occasionally get into some minor disputes about what's a success and what's a failure, but other than that, we're doing pretty well. We have a representative who handles our mentor program from a private agency. I think that's the core of the group. The other thing I would say about Judge Hopper, in answer to your question, is that when Rich started this court, and actually when Judge Palenti, Mary Palenti, had the energy for this court, I think their vision was that it was going to be Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, and it was going to be that right off the bat. Well, it turns out that the major portion of the early participants in the court were Vietnam veterans, and we're 35 plus years after the Vietnam War, and yet when we had 60 or so in the court, over 30 of those were Vietnam veterans who were still suffering from the scourges of that war and the societal influences that influenced them.
Well, I've seen Vietnam veterans that, 25 years after the war, 15 or 20 jobs, 4 or 5 DWIs, 3 or 4 marriages, and that's directly as a result of, somebody flies back from Vietnam to Oakland, they're out the next day and we're done with you, and assuming that everything's just fine. And I think we made some strides to say we want to get the behavioral health help to get people beyond some of their problems, and so they're not going to just be cycling through the criminal justice system.
And so what we do with them is we have the regular judicial reviews. We expect them to come in and tell us about how they're doing at least once a month on a scheduled basis. We have this dedicated staff who deals with them between their reviews, supervises their progress. We use programming from the Veterans Administration, chemical dependency programming, behavioral health programming, and actual health programming, especially for the Vietnam vets. And we figure that we'll have them with us between a year and 18 months before we feel that we've achieved our goals, which of course are being chemically free, no new arrests, finish the treatment programs that we ask them. We want them to have permanent housing, and we want them to be reintegrated into society in a way that's satisfactory to them. And we've had about a 70% success rate so far, although we really are only at about the 20-month point. So we're just now starting to have a significant number of graduates.
And many, as you mentioned with the multidisciplinary teams, that there are many people who contribute, everything from mentors. You've got a prosecutor that's got to protect public safety in the county attorney's office, and the public defenders who's at the other side of the table. And it's remarkable how people have worked together to make sure that this is a success and to learn from the activity that as we go forward.
Well, they certainly do bring their individual or their agency's interests to the table, but it is remarkable to me how much everybody's interest is in cure. Cure in a criminal sense and cure in a behavioral health sense. We're really trying to effect cure. We're not about punishment. Now, we talked earlier about this issue of is this a get-out-of-jail-free card? Well, it is a get-out-of-jail card. I mean, there's no buts about that. We do not use punitive correctional sanctions in every case. We use them in some cases, but we don't use them in every case. But it is not free. The amount of work that we expect these folks to do for themselves is in some cases monumental. We do chemical health testing daily with some folks where they have to come down and be tested. We have folks that are on prescribed medications, and we make them come to one of our facilities in downtown Minneapolis to get their medications every day so we can be sure that they're taking their medications. We expect them to be in therapy at least weekly, most of them. We send many through programming at the VA or in private organizational treatment facilities in the Twin Cities mostly, and we expect them to do that. And for many of them, that's all day, every day, even on an outpatient business, all day basis, every day, all day for a month or 6 weeks. So I would think that many of them would say, had I not been, quote, cured, it would have been easier to go to jail.
And you bring up an interesting point there that the Veterans Administration will treat anybody as a veteran as long as they're not in custody. And there may be some things that the VA does not provide. And as you mentioned here, the court can have additional treatment if it's not offered at the VA.
Well, for example, a good example of that is domestic abuse cases where there's a statutory requirement that they get an anger management or domestic abuse program. The VA is in implementation stages of those programs, but up until now, they haven't had them. So we've been using the kinds of programs we use for everybody on domestic abuse, the Domestic Abuse Project and others, to meet that statutory requirement, but also to meet the needs of the soldiers.
All right. Well, one of the underlying issues that has really come to the fore is post-traumatic stress disorder. And obviously, with Minnesota having so many troops having served National Guard and Reserves in a combat role and coming back, that's been a significant issue, and I assume you certainly have seen it play out in the court.
Well, yes, absolutely. There are statistics on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that are somewhat all over the map, but one that no one seems to disagree with, as everybody can agree it's at least this big, is about 25% of the returning folks from Iraq and Afghanistan are suffering from it. Just as an aside, it's a well-known fact now, sort of on the inside, that of the Army troops that survived the Normandy invasion, that weren't killed on the beach, 99% were discharged for psychological injuries or physical injuries or both. PTSD is not something new to this war. It's newly recognized, but soldier's heart, combat fatigue, whatever you've called it over the years, it's the same issue. And we're working on figuring out how to treat it, and the VA is spending nights and weekends trying to figure out how to successfully treat these guys, because it's disabling in the extreme.
And the fact that we are fighting a conflict with National Guard troops and reserve troops who may, if they have PTSD, come back home and be deployed a second and a third time, that only makes that condition worse.
And geometrically, maybe it's 20% in the first deployment, it's up to around 45% in the second, it's up around 75% after the third. I mean, it is not just linear, it's actually geometric. The other signature injury from these two conflicts is traumatic brain injury. And I mean, those of us in the Twin Cities know that, the NFL doesn't know how to treat traumatic brain injury, the Twins don't know how to treat it, and we don't really know how to treat it either, other than we know that it has a significant negative effect on cognitive functioning for someone to have a traumatic brain injury. And again, a very high proportion of these soldiers have that from the incidents involving this improvised explosive device that seems to be the weapon of choice in Iraq and more so maybe now in Afghanistan.
And I'll just share with you a story from last time we were at Fort McCoy working with Red Bulls, and I was talking to somebody when we were doing a combat theater questionnaire with them, asking them about what happened to him in Iraq, and I asked him about IEDs. He said, "Oh no, I was 15 feet away." And there's a sense if there's no seeming physical damage that nothing happened, but one of the things with the conflict with the body armor and everything, what's not protected is the head.
Is the head. Well, and that's I'd like to take just a second to put in a plug for the VA. There was a time, and as I say, I've been involved with the VA as a judge off and on for many years, and up until maybe 5 years ago or less, I think that most lawyers and many others believed that the business of the Veterans Administration was to make sure that nobody got treatment by the VA. And they've had a 180-degree change on that. They couldn't be more cooperative with us. They couldn't be working harder for the benefit of these veterans.
Well, very good. Well, we've got a short period of time here to wrap up, and my observation is that the VA has really put its heart and soul into addressing the needs of these veterans and making sure that they're going to have decent lives going forward. And in the remaining time that we have, why don't you leave us with one last thought about the Veterans Court?
Well, let me run through two quickly, and I'll try to do it. The first is suicides. In 2010, the Army suffered more suicides than combat deaths. It is a really hard problem, mostly exacerbated by PTSD. But the second thing that I would really like to leave with is the idea that the underlying philosophical reason for doing this court is that we have promised these guys and women that if they go and protect our freedom, we'll take care of them when they return. And this court's mission is to take care, in the criminal context, of these folks that have found themselves in difficulty because of their military experience, many of them combat experience.
Well, thank you, Judge Porter, for what you do and the difference that you make in the lives of the veterans who come through the Veterans Court. And for American Salutes, thank you.